Hi guys, thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. We are going to go live in 2 minutes time. We are just waiting for everyone to join us. So if you have time, get yourself a quick coffee, go to the ladies or gents and get ready for an exciting discussion with Sean and Will and our fabulous host for today's session, Daniel Robus.
Thanks, Gary. It's so good to be back, man. I haven't seen you in ages. First time I'm facilitating in a while. It's been a busy 6 months. I see we still don't have jazz music. I might have to sing this time.
I know, Dan. I'm going to take you up on that one day.
It'll never happen. But we've got lots of rings and dings coming through from people joining because it's quite a hot topic today, an integrated identity platform and why it should be on your radar. I'm super excited for this discussion. I know we're still waiting to get on the hour so we can kick off. We've still got 1 minute, but I'm pretty pumped to get into the discussion with Will and with Sean. And then we've got a mystery guest joining halfway, which is awesome. So it's going to spice things up even more. Are we recording today, Carrie?
We are recording and we are also live streaming. So for any guests that couldn't join us and wanted to also share it with colleagues around the table, we are live streaming to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and well, I can't say Twitter anymore, X. I mean, can we even say send us a tweet? I'm not sure what's the right terminology anymore. But
do you remember Prince? Do you remember Prince, the artist formerly known as X? Yeah, the artist formerly known as Twitter is also going to be on here. So if you want to tweet about our session, please feel free to do that. We will be giving a giveaway at the end of the session where we've got a report that we're talking to. So there's going to be lots and lots of takeaways. And I can see someone's already used the chat. If you have any questions, we're going to be taking your questions. Give it, pop the questions through. I'll work it into the discussion with Will and Sean. Believe me, they can both answer all the questions that you may have. Dion van Eden, you win with X-Ray. X-Ray wins the morning. Thanks, Dion. How's it?
All right, Dan. So I like to be on time and already we're 1 minute over. So I'm going to say good afternoon, guys, and welcome to this really insightful Contactable webinar. So thank you all for joining us today as we really delve into why an identity integrated platform should be on your radar. We really do welcome your active participation in all of our events. So please use the Q&A functionality to pose any questions to our esteemed panel today. And we also will have a poll to gauge where you guys are in terms of your journey and your understanding. And as Dan mentioned a few minutes ago, we will be addressing all your questions live or answering them in the Q&A function. And with that, Dan, I'm going to hand over to you and our fabulous panel for today's session.
Thanks, Carrie. And I'm Daniel Robus. I'm your host for today. It's so good to be back. It's almost summer in South Africa, and Johannesburg has put on a good face for today. So I hope you've got a glass of water, a cup of coffee, or anything you want to drink, because hold on your hats. Integrated identity platforms is going to be quite a quick discussion. First of all, we're joined by Sean Stradham, who's the Contactable founder and the CEO. Sean has a very long CV, so I'm not going to go through everything that Sean has done. Needless to say, you've been an Deloitte partner. You're a chartered accountant, which we never hold against you. You've had many senior executive roles in corporate finance, business turnarounds, investment banking across the continent in Europe and America. And most importantly, you're an awesome paddle player. That is pretty good. Welcome, Sean. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Dan. Nice to be here.
And then we've got Will Charnley, who's the MD of Liminal Advisory Services. You provide identity data and privacy solutions across the globe. He's also the driver behind the report which caused us to have today's session, which is the rise of the integrated identity platforms and how the identity market is evolving towards end-to-end platforms, creating value for enterprises and consumers. Now, Will, that's quite a long title. We're going to dive into that. But if you were explaining to a class of fourth graders what Liminal does, what would you say to them?
First of all, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. I think time is right to be talking about integrated identity platforms, which is also a mouthful. We call them IIPs here for short. Liminal, we are a strategy and market intelligence firm that does advisory research. And where we see our key differentiators, we focus squarely in digital identity. So, we often are producing a lot of the seminal research in the space, like the Integrated Identity Platform Report, both talking about what has happened in the past and forecasting where we see the market going. And this is a big topic of discussion of kind of where we think's headed.
And the fourth graders got that. More importantly, Will, you come from Boston, the land of the Red Sox. You studied there, and you've spent a lot of time in the kind of NGO sector. Is identity and identity understanding as important in that sector as in the commercial environment? Do you think it's a global issue that we're dealing with at the moment?
I would say, yeah. I mean, I think identity, we always say identity is a how, not a what, especially as we see, digitization kind of across the board with services. I think, for folks here, if you're, at a business and you don't have an identity solution in place, you should really do that. It's paramount, I think, not just for security, but for streamlining things for your customers, for attracting and retaining your customers. Identity really is kind of the fabric, along with kind of payment rails that we see as being, highly important, if not foundational to kind of the digital interactions. And, we're seeing more that physical and digital line blur. So now even more, physical interactions are requiring digital identity as well. So
awesome.
Absolutely.
Sean, before we dive into this report that we've been talking around and graphs and numbers and things that scare me, why for you is identity such a hot topic in South Africa and our continent? What's driving this?
Yeah, Dan, it's a big question and a big topic, but I think what Will's saying is spot on, right? It's this is happening. It's happening quickly. We are seeing a migration of organizations into digital channels in servicing their customers, and I think there's three things possibly that is really driving it, and the first one really is the customer, the consumer, all right? They now have access to technology. They are certainly digitally empowered. They are making decisions, choices. They are clicking buttons. They want things to happen. And we've provided that obviously to them from a, global economy perspective. And I think the one big catalyst as well is that they're getting back, something they've been demanding for quite some time. And in some respects, COVID has fueled this, right? Because it forced us into a digital engagement. And they're getting back their information, their identity, the control over it, the freedom of choice. And obviously this is driving organizations to respond to that. So I think that's probably the first thing and the biggest catalyst, because certainly the race is on for the customer and the relationship with the customer. And the second thing I think is legislation, which very often lags changes in technology and innovation. But we're certainly seeing legislation is starting to catch up. It doesn't help if you have fantastic technology and great initiatives around digital identity, for example, but legislation doesn't support it. It doesn't allow it to be used. And, even in South Africa, the changes to the FICA legislation, moving this to more of a risk-based approach has certainly opened up the ability now to utilize these technologies and service the customers and start really, focusing on financial inclusion and access to products and services and stuff, because technology allows that. And then I think the third thing is, which is probably the biggest topic for today, is, what is the true enabler for all of this? And that is really identity technology and integrated identity platforms. Because, you've got organizations, governments that are trying to respond to this. Customers gone digital, legislation is saying different things. Customers demand these services, but organizations need to respond to that. And it's complicated, right? Whether it's just something as simple as digital onboarding or verification or KYC, moving that from a physical environment, the way we used to do it, to a digital environment creates immense complexity for organizations. To do this, to do it properly, to do it in a manner that is trusted, supports legislation and regulation, fraud and risk and all of these things. So there's technology. It's moving extremely fast. It's innovating at a very, very fast pace. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. So, you got these three things coming together. And we are literally on a daily basis chatting to organizations that are migrating to digital. They're relooking their business models, their processes, and all with the objective of now reshaping those around the customer's journey and what the customer wants at the end of the day. But that certainly, I believe, is driving it, and identity is the fabric that holds all of this together.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're working in silos, we're working in physical ways, we're working almost kicking our toes across enterprise and across business because we're not working together. And I think when we read your report, well, that's why we wanted to talk around this is there a better way? And how do we get there? And I think, I don't want to talk through your report. You're going to show it to us. Maybe we should say, Will Charlie, enter stage left. You are just down the road at the moment from Broadway. So I'll open the curtain for you and you can take the stage.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think, Sean, you're kind of spot on here. Let me just... This is the one digital issue I probably haven't solved. Am I sharing the right screen? Hopefully, yes. You think, 3 years past the start of the pandemic, I would have gotten that. But yeah, we want to take you just through, a little bit of the report. The report is available, I believe, Contactable. Sean, Dan have the report. I'm distributing the report. It's, I think about 100 slides. We're not going to go through all 100 today, but just to get a sense of kind of what we're talking about, and just to make sure folks kind of understand what we mean here when we say integrated identity platforms. So I'm going to use the term IIPs. It's just easier for me to say, but IIPs, so when we talk about their end-to-end platforms with capabilities across the consumer lifecycle, what you see right on the screen here, that tie underlying feature capabilities or product capabilities through things like orchestration, network signals to enhance user experience for customers. They're better at identifying and combating fraud. Sean, you mentioned regulatory shifts, better equipped to comply with regulatory complexities, both globally and locally. And a key benefit really here is simplifying the actual stack for enterprise customers, right? Every day we talk to folks who are using 10, 11, 12 vendors just for one part of this consumer lifecycle or this customer journey, which is incredibly complex. So, digital identity, we often talk about, solutions like access management, like authentication, et cetera. But when we think about solutions, we think about it on a typical kind of customer lifecycle here, right? In general, you're still trying to do similar things in a digital environment that you would if someone's walking into your brick and mortar store, right? You're trying to pre-registration, identify, target good customers, keep away bad customers. You're trying to get them to register, create an account with you, right? Create a relationship. You want to be able to have customers be able to log in here, right? Be able to re-access that account, re-enter their account. You have to do some level, both regulatory requirement in some instances and for fraud, right? You want to monitor transactions. And you want to have ongoing engagement. You want to be able to communicate in a manner with your customers here. I think not shown here, but really, I think when you think about IPs, it's not just about the breadth across the life cycle. It's about the depth, right? This is true everywhere, but especially even in many emerging markets, right? I mean, you can have, and I know Contactable, you guys have, many different ways to authenticate a user, to verify a user. Many solutions out there might do one thing. I can register a customer in one way. I can do it through government document. That's it. Challenge there is, that's not accessible to everyone. And the depth at which these IPs have, product capabilities. And I know, Sean, you could probably speak to all the different capabilities, Contactable has. That helps make sure you can, if you have 100 customers coming through, you can actually convert 100 customers. You're not dropping off 20% because you can't support their onboarding process. When we think through IIPs, this is really a new phase that we're entering into, but it's not a new process, right? We have seen markets go through this process of, emergence, growth, and then this forming phase across verticals. Digital health has done this. Marketplaces, you can think about your kind of, eBays of the world have done this, right? This is not a unique timeline or S-curve that you typically see. Typically you see some phase of emergence here, right? This is where we saw a lot of point solutions, right? A lot of, vendors who do one thing enter the market. Sean hinted at this, but we saw massive growth that was really accelerated by COVID. And then now we're really seeing this platforming phase. We're at the beginning stages here. Obviously there are companies at the forefront of that movement, but we're really in the early days starting to see these IIPs emerge. When we go through, I won't go through this entire timeline with you, but it's not as sudden as COVID and now, right? Identity has been evolving and emerging over the last 20 plus years. This timeline could go farther left. We just picked 20 years because it's easier to digest here. But I think really important to focus here in the last 3 years, with COVID. So 2020, we had accelerated trends toward digitization, a massive new wave of customers onboarding digitally. In terms of kind of new digital registrations, we saw that growth rate at Liminal go from, kind of pre-2020 around 10% a year to all of a sudden COVID hits. In many across verticals, you had growth rates 20, 30. I mean, in some things like crypto, triple digit, right? New digital account creation growth over a several year span there. And that caused a massive shift and a massive focus on onboarding, that registration phase on that chevron there. And in response, 2020, 2021, we saw record funding into the space. Cover that a little bit later, but saw around $10 billion go into funding companies, specifically around consumer identity for enterprises. We saw this shift really around consumer identity versus enterprise security, right? Which was where a big focus was before. 2022 macro market overall, I mean, globally and just in particular markets, right? Struggled. We saw new account volumes drop 30 to 50% in some high growth industries, crypto, fintech, buy now, pay later, et cetera, which has led us to this point, which is, as enterprises think about how they want to interact with their consumers, as vendors in the space and as investors really think through things, it's, how can we better serve customers digitally? And a lot of that is through, streamlining the process for them. A lot of that is also done through simplifying the hoops they have to jump through to get onto a platform. And that's really where we're seeing the push from IIPs come. I won't spend too much time here. Sean, I don't know if you wanted to chime in here.
Sorry, no, we'll carry on. Yeah.
Okay. I won't spend too much time here, but when we talk about what kind of was and what is, where we're going here. So this is, typically how we've seen a lot of enterprises interact with vendors, right? I mean, even I know Okta's on here, right? Okta's big public company. They're even today in a single small part of what we would call login, right? It's access management. They're not necessarily doing the entire piece of even login, right? So the challenge here is if this is your consumer, they're interacting in silos across that customer lifecycle. Your Okta knows Will Charnley in a certain way, authentication token. It doesn't know my government ID. You have your registration platforms that know probably the most about a consumer, but are oftentimes never leveraged again throughout the customer lifecycle. And it creates these disparate data silos, where you don't have communication between them, which leads to, in a lot of instances, worse experience for customers, less security, and frankly, for enterprises, a ton more cost if you actually think about the integration and implementation of a lot of those solutions. When we think about IIPs, really every interaction coming through that integrated identity platform, right? The platform, right, is orchestrating either to its own solutions or partner relationships It's also gaining the benefit of understanding all the interactions. So it can say, Sean was a good user yesterday. Now, when he went to authenticate, something's happening. We have to step up. All right, now we're seeing a clear picture. Is something happening with Sean over time? Not to pick on you, Sean. I know that would never happen, but you can see if you're kind of this customer coming through, your single point of interaction, your single point of the enterprise, it's a full, complete picture, which really streamlines things for folks. When we think about the market, I think 3 big things we focus in on here in terms of where and why IIPs add value. There's more, but these are, I think, some of the biggest ones here. First, today, still a lot of legacy systems in place. It leads to a really poor experience overall for consumers. Just to pick on one industry, e-commerce, right? Conducted a study, and I think it found in the last year, the estimated $18 billion globally was lost from really poor execution of transactions, like how do you actually execute the transactions, or forced account creation for these platforms. It's a lot of money for lost that could be prevented there. We also see fraud really rising in sophistication here. In the last year, right around $9 billion in the US alone lost to fraud, increased 30% since 2021, year over year. Wow. And lastly, it's a really complex tech stack. Enterprises don't know their customer well. They know a piece of their customer. They're spending a ton of money on integration implementation, and it's not working for anyone. And where we really see the value, right? So when it comes to the UX, orchestration is key here, right? I'm sure as a Contactable team can tell you, right? Being able to find the best and right journey for someone when they're going through a process is incredibly important. And the way you do that is through orchestration. Through understanding the pathways to be able to do that effectively for each unique customer, because you have to treat each customer uniquely. Fraud, where we see a lot of value coming there from IPs is in the ability to get, provide network signals and scoring on top of the siloed data, right? Being able to get a full picture of, Sean and his transactional history and his history accessing his account and, the validity of his, kind of true identity or government identity, right? All those steps together help ensure that you're protecting that consumer and also doing so without gathering unnecessary data points or adding friction in different stages. And then, on enterprises knowing their customer well, it's the complete lifecycle coverage, right? You're able to actually understand the consumer even before they create an account, but at the point of account creation, right? A lot of times we're getting a lot of the data to understand will, and then tie that into the other pieces, right? Authentication token, mobile device, right? Get a really full picture so Will is, my government ID. Will can also be the phone that is known and registered to me. It could also be my Mac, right? You're able to tie those pieces all together. What that really unlocks.
Will, just before you go, we've got a couple of questions. Do you want me to hold them till you've finished, or do you want to take them on the slide where they're relevant? So really up to you.
We can do on the slide. That works.
And we got a question, which is, what do you see as the approaches to managing data privacy in these platforms as they hold increasingly large amounts of sensitive personal data in support of digital access? Which I think is a great question. And then the follow-on from the same person is UMA, user managed access for delegation and control, being important to these future experiences. Do you see UMA as solving some of these problems? And I don't mind, Sean, if you want to dive into either of it, or Will, do you want to have a stab first?
Sure. Yeah, I love to hear, Sean, your perspective too. I think maybe I'll take them one at a time. On the first piece, the data privacy, I mean, privacy is a big rising concern. There's a lot of regulations specifically around getting user consent for things like storing data, biometric storage, et cetera. I wouldn't say that that's an exclusive integrated identity platform problem to solve. That's really across all vendors. We see many point solutions getting dinged by regulators, certainly. I think integrated identity platforms are actually uniquely positioned there because their continuous interaction with consumers. A lot of the challenges with privacy come with, I'll just use some recent examples locally here in the US where vendors have gotten fined by states like Illinois for BIPA, which is a biometric law here. A lot of that comes from an interaction with a vendor maybe 2 years ago, and they're storing that data not because they need it, not because they're still interacting with that customer, but they still have it, right? IIPs are actually continuously interacting with that customer because they're across that life cycle. So I think better positioned to get things like up-to-date permissioning and consent from actual users and be more transparent, actually. Sean, I don't know if you agree or disagree.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, right? And, certainly how we've thought about it as we architected the solution, it's got to be, firstly, it's got to be consent driven. So it's where's the starting point, right? So, for us, the starting point has got to be, in this example, the consumer. Have they consented to it? Do they understand what they're getting into? And then protecting the privacy of their journey all the way through, okay? As a data, moving into encryption, security, and blockchain, and how that all gets stored and protected, as Will said, that's a topic all on its own. But certainly any digital solution, and now legislation is driving that as well, has got to protect the individual's information, and that's from consent through storage through everything. Now, IIPs play a critical role in essentially bridging that gap, right, between the consumer, what needs to be orchestrated to deliver a result, and then how that result then resides in the organization that's opening the bank account or activating a SIM card or whatever that may be. So it's got to be designed on that basis, but certainly driven by consent and privacy, because that's the foundation of identity at the end of the day.
Awesome, thank you. And then user managed access. I mean, I could answer that. Absolutely, it's critical as part of these things. So we'll probably dive into that one a little bit later. Sean, I'd love you to take on that one. So back to you, Will, if you want to carry on where we were. Thanks for those questions. We've got another one, but I'm going to wait on that other one. I'm going to keep it as a surprise for you just now.
Oh, now I'm scared.
No.
Cool. I won't belabor, I think, this one. I think, what that all means and kind of kicking over to the IIP value, we see a tremendous value for integrated identity platforms. And we think this market is rapidly growing and evolving. Driven here by really this second point here, which is when we've gone out and talked to enterprises, the number one thing we hear from them is, how do I simplify my stack, right? How do I kind of break down these data silos? This is a massive issue for me. And we have heard from many customers, right? They're really pushing to switch towards these integrated identity platforms. It still is a nascent market here, but it is rapidly growing, and we see this as within 5 years really being a market that if you're not thinking about as a customer, how do I use an integrated identity platform? If you're a vendor and not thinking about how you operate in that kind of dynamic, now is really the time.
Thank you. So there is money to be made and money growing in this environment. So that's another reason to listen to this. I can see Brandon just joined us. Welcome, Brandon. I'll do a formal intro as soon as we've finished with Will, and then we can ask you a couple of tough questions that we've put together since you joined us late. No, we're joking. Thank you for joining. Will, back to you.
Yep, absolutely. So I guess what it all means and really where the value is, we see tremendous value for enterprises to implement integrated identity platforms. So kind of what's in it for me. We project, every dollar you spend with an integrated identity platform, you're going to realize about, we'll call it 15, just to round it, $15 back to your organization. You're going to be able to, onboard and retain more of your customers. Obviously, customers bring a tremendous amount of value. If you're in a bank, right, a lifetime value of a customer can be very high. Even in e-commerce, right, you're talking about hundreds of dollars per customer potentially value back. The next big piece is integration savings. Integration of new solutions is, I don't think anyone loves that process. I've never heard someone say, man, I'm really amped up for a great integration or implementation of a solution. And a key benefit really for integrated identity platforms is, you are leveraging them to connect into a lot of times, additional solutions without having to do a whole integration just to say, hey, we're going to, whatever it is, add biometrics to our solution or add mobile verification to our solution, right? You're able to leverage, that single point of access to tie in additional capabilities. So you really save on that and, and on the subsequent overhead of that process. Last big piece here is really on the ability to combat fraud. I think, fraudsters are getting way more sophisticated. Generative AI is great for everyone, and I think it has accelerated both the speed at which, the volume, and the sophistication of fraud, across that life cycle. In particular, we're seeing a ton of fraud in synthetic identity, and having a complete platform that can really see across the entire customer helps you to better recognize, right, the issue I was talking about earlier, which is someone can be a good user today and be a bad user 2 days from now, right? And if you don't have a full picture of that consumer, it's really hard to combat that. If you don't have signals sharing back and forth, and IIPs really help realize that return. And then lastly, hold on, there we go. All right, there is also return back to, right? The customer here is the enterprise, but the enterprise customer a lot of times is the actual end user, and there is a return there for those folks as well, right? Users benefit, right? The actual consumers benefit here, right? A lot of times when fraud happens, it's not just the business out of money. A lot of times it's also, someone on the other end that's out of money or compromised or feeling vulnerable, right? They get the benefit of that security, as well as more, trust, better experiences, and less wait time, which, we often see a paradigm between kind of friction, user experience and security. And I think IIPs really break that trade-off and allow you to get both, which is really beneficial. And so, all right, this is the last one I got for you guys. If you're one of these folks, an investor, buyers, vendors, how we see the market, and you're saying, does this mean I should act? The short answer is yes. It does mean you should act. Investors, massive opportunity here. If you're looking at investing into companies, you should be asking how they factor into this, new landscape, either as a solution into an integrated identity platform or integrated identity platform who can orchestrate a lot of those solutions. Buyers, there is real return, dollar return to using these platforms, right? And you should be looking to switch not only for the inherent benefits, but for the monetary benefits. And for, vendors in the space, I think you have to understand where you fit into this landscape. If you're, saying, hey, I'm not sure I'm an integrated identity platform, I'm more of a specialist point solution, that can be okay. I think it's finding the right channels to work with the right partners who have these capabilities to maximize the effectiveness of your solution.
Brilliant.
So that's what I got for you, Dan.
That was a great way to bring it to land. And I think we're going to go to a fireside chat now, which will be brilliant. We're going to run a quick poll. And I would like everyone just to have a look at the question. The question is, what is currently more important to your organization for digital onboarding? Lowering customer friction or lowering customer fraud? While you're answering this, I'm going to introduce our mystery guest in block 3 for me, Brandon, who is Chief Specialist Governance and Compliance Information Officer for a leading JSE-listed automotive company. He's also the head of an industry governing body. Brandon, that is awesome to have you here. As we see the poll changing, I can see the results. We're on a 50-50, which is terrible for me at the moment. Sean, do you want to talk around this? And then I'm going to ask Brandon to say hi. What do you think of the poll results there? 52-48 so far. Lower customer friction seems to be winning this horse race. Do you agree?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I'd have to see where it ends up, but certainly from experience, this is changing. I think if you probably did this poll maybe a year ago, I think customer friction would have been a little bit further up the percentage curve. Because that was the whole push, do it quicker, faster, impress the customer. And certainly that is still very, very important in these digital journeys. But it can't be at the full cost of compromise and regulation and fraud and these things. So as digital fraud has increased and as the sophistication around a lot of these syndicates has increased, organizations are starting to, get that balance right, in my view. It's got to be a great customer experience, but you can't compromise too much on some of the things that have to be done. So I think this is fascinating. I would predict that if you had the same poll in a year's time, I would probably say that the lower customer fraud is probably going to edge out customer friction a little bit, just simply because of how this digital environment is evolving.
Well, one of our friends said, this is a terrible question, Daniel. Can I choose both, please? And I agreed. Delian, you hit it spot on. I think with an IIP, you should be able to do both. And that's Correct. The whole point of our discussion today, is that you shouldn't have to choose either. Yeah. So Delian wins a prize. Yeah. We're going to have to give her a chocolate.
I do think, a lot of, this has been a choice a lot of folks have had to make in the past. Right. It's almost like a kind of demand curve line, right? It's do you want to protect your customers better at the sacrifice of user experience? And I think IIPs really flip that model on its head and allow you to do both. So, I guess the answer back to you, Dan, would be yes, they can pick both actually now. So
awesome.
Absolutely.
And I think also, Dan, if I may add one last thing there, is that, again, if you look at the depth of solutions that sit on the IIPs and the ability to change these solutions, because it's evolving extremely quickly. Okay, so the technology is getting better and better. So the ability to combat fraud through even better digital technologies that are available on these IIPs, is ultimately not going to compromise the friction point to the extent that it goes, to two extremes, because the tech is getting better and better and better, and that then also addresses friction to some extent.
Awesome, thank you, Brandon. Bringing you in here, how was your meeting before this? As fun as being on a panel like this?
Well, the meeting was face to face, which means people can throw things.
Yeah.
At least here, they can only throw comments. And apologies for being late, but interestingly, the reason we ran over time was talking about at industry level, at auto industry level, onboarding, and the friction of the process, and how the laws have almost superseded people's understanding of what is required. And if it's not a frictionless process, that creates incredible conflict, at retail level. So that's actually, that went on a little bit further, but it is something that is faced everywhere, and how best to remove that friction, comply, and also have your fraud risk, mitigated. So that's actually why I joined late.
I really enjoy the trifecta that we've got there, which is legacy systems. On one side, they've been there, they're doing their job, but maybe they've been left behind. We've got the fraud actors who don't have to obey any rules. They can do whatever they want. Yet we've got the marketing folks saying we need all these customers in here. And how do we get in the middle? Brandon, from a motor perspective, how have you dealt with it up to now, and what do you think the future holds for you? What's your utopia?
So starting at the end and working the way backwards, the utopia is that on the one hand, customers understand the requirements of them, so that it's not what I dealt with this week with a customer complaint that said, you cannot possibly be doing security checking through a selfie with me. You must be, and I'm telling the truth, stealing my image for marketing purposes later. I've never had to do any of this buying a car. So the utopia is this: customers know what they're in for, probably having gone through a bit of the heartache of doing manual processes and having this seamless global, just flick to phone onto your face, which we are pretty much there where I work, and everything's done. And having that come back to the customer, which can be used in future, given to another provider with their permission and things like that. That seamless integrated, where I rent a car, hey, I've seen you before. Can we use your data? Yes. Flick a button, cool, your data is injected into their system. To me, that's utopia.
Sure. And what's stopping us from getting there right now?
Well, time, people, money, testing, environments. But the reality is, adoption is one element. And when using new tech and in the automotive space, IIP is new tech. I mean, my employer, we've been using it. So I think we went live in 2018. But that we really were cutting edge on that one, and we got to develop with you guys. But it's this notion that you can do something without a piece of paper in front of you, without a photocopier and a stamp and an ultraviolet light. This concept of remotely interacting with the consumer, and it's getting over legacy. It's not legacy system, it's legacy human. There is how we always sold a car, and why do we have to change that way? And that's it's the own internal element more even than customer. And then of course consumer, we were helped massively with COVID. It sounds awful, but people couldn't come to the dealers, and those who could come to the dealers didn't really want to touch anyone or anything and hand over documents. And so when we then say, well, we do have this tech, we'll just flick it to your phone and you can do it yourself at home. Adoption starts getting much faster, both in our staff, but mainly for the customers. And COVID allowed us to create that on stress test the system, stress test the environment, and really push it through. So, that has helped us immensely.
Excellent. Sean, I've got a question for you from a perspective of customers adopting this. What do you think are the two biggest blocks from an enterprise going from point solutions into looking at identity as a holistic area? What are you seeing is slowing people down, embracing an IIP?
I think probably the biggest driver, Daniel, is that, we need to realize that organizations are still quite siloed. If you think of a financial institution, one department talking to the other department, that's how they were traditionally structured. So when it comes to adoption, because what IIPs drive is they cut across all of that. They understand ecosystems. They understand that there's a singular customer and there's multiple use cases, So, I want to be able to enter this technology, and whether I have if I'm getting a credit card and it's the blue or the silver or the platinum one that has different processes, I want to be able to do that. I don't want to know that, this department doesn't talk to the other department. So the siloed nature of these things, sometimes hampers adoption, because, the IIP requires, in a perfect world, the integration into all of those worlds, because it comes from the perspective of the customer and then addresses the complexity that the organization needs to deal with in these ecosystems and federated processes and things like that. So that's often what stops adoption. So from an organizational perspective, and then secondly, I think Brandon nailed it. It's also, there's some customer education, there's some change management that needs to take place for people to understand it. Pre-COVID, if I can use that as a benchmark, people were quite reluctant to use digital technologies. They didn't quite understand it. And I think in some respects didn't quite trust it because it was so new. But as adoption starts increasing, it's amazing how people are now embracing it. And they're now saying, but hang on, why don't you do it like that? Because I can do it like that there. So we're certainly seeing that wave changing. But yeah, the biggest issue I still think is organizations are not quite perfectly structured for this. We see consumers now, not just within one organization, but they operate across a totally interoperable ecosystem. So, I'm at a telco, but I also want to buy something at a retailer. They don't understand why they can't do that. They want, and we are all customers, right? So breaking through interoperability, creating this concept of reusable identities. Brandon, you mentioned it. Why can't I use the one over there? IIPs already do all of those things. So it's just a question of adoption and organizations looking at identity from a macro level and not from a divisional level. So if you're serious about your customer and building an identity solution around that caters for all your use cases, all your integrations, all your complexity, it has to start at the top and filter through the organization rather than trying to do it through certain silos.
Brandon, carrying on from where Sean has come, we've got an interesting chat going on there. Dillian is keeping people on their toes. We also have a couple of questions in the Q&A, which are coming through. But Brandon, if you could wave a magic wand, what is the policy you would change in your industry that could open the doors to a frictionless digital identity management process? And then the second to all three of you is this at the C-level? Does a digital identity exec sit around the boardroom table making enterprise decisions currently, or are you seeing it happen? So I'll get to that one after Brandon's policy change and ask you, Will, and then Sean to answer the C-level question.
Okay, so Daniel, to your first question, I don't think it's just my own industry. I think it's all industries. Everyone's very, very protective of their patch. And the biggest thing I think, and it's across everywhere, is that sharing the digital identity with the user, their own identity's permission, it needs to be understood better. And what I mean by that is, we want to, if we get the customer in our business at our retail store, no matter what tech we're using to onboard them, no matter what we've done, we want to hold that customer and not share that customer and not tell anyone and lock that data down. And that's great for transactional stuff. But when you're getting to digital identity, the nice thing would be more sharing across, where we mature to a level to know that your digital identity is yours. It's not your retailers. It's not that. And that's not something they hold on to or not share. They can hold on to interesting things like transactional data, data protection stuff, GDPR stuff. But this is just moving identity. And I think everyone then across my own industry, but all industries will benefit from that one, the awesome. Free movement of that. And then to your C-level question, maybe the Silicon Valley ones, but we're at Auto, we're just trying to sell a car here. We just adopted cell phones recently. No, I mean, I think it will be quite a lot to get to those kind of very specified, very futuristic, very necessary positions. But that it's certainly none that I am aware of anywhere in our world.
Do we have say at around the boardroom table for this?
It's certainly changing, Daniel. Again, the evolution maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when this started, you ended up talking to the marketing department, right? And now we are certainly talking to the C-levels because I think organizations are starting to realize this is a big strategic decision. And I think the C-levels, if you look at the new positions that are being created, Chief Digital Officer and these things, it's all around, gravitating and embracing digital and creating leadership and structure and strategy around those things. And I think some of it is also, lessons learned. Organizations are starting to to realize actually how complicated this is. To implement solutions across multiple channels and creating a singular identity. And I see there's lots going on about self-sovereign, or that big fans of all this because it embraces all of those things, right? So I think the discussions are certainly trending in the right direction. The benefits of IIPs is certainly becoming known, and C-levels are starting to take it seriously because, and Brendan, I like what you're saying, it's actually not their customer. We are our own customers. We will decide where we want to go. We want to own and control our future, and technology needs to enable that, and organizations need to respect that. And that's how you will start getting interoperability and trust across all of these things. Right now, it's happening in mushrooms. The motor industry is doing it brilliantly. Telcos are starting to do it brilliantly, financial services, but it's still in pockets. It certainly needs to collapse, and I think that's just an evolution. And IIPs are there to run those processes effectively.
Well, how's your answer to that one? I know you've drank the Kool-Aid. You have all the people around, so you actually cheating. Do we have to listen to Will? Actually, Sean, do we listen? No, go.
I don't. I think Brandon and Sean said it beautifully. So I'll just. I mean, you also have positions like Chief Identity Officer, which we see now, right?
Wow.
Which I think shows that a lot of the enterprises are starting to think about identity across the organization as kind of a holistic thing here. But I absolutely, I think we're definitely seeing this at the executive level. And I think it's a both and as folks are in the market selling these identity solutions, still have to be able to tell someone in compliance what this means for compliance, and someone in risk what this means for a risk, and someone in customer experience what it means to them. So there's still a lot of stakeholders involved. It's about, and there's benefits for all of them. It's just about making those really clear.
Well, I've got an interesting segue in there, which is we're always 6 months behind, we think, on fashion trends and movies. So in this, are we behind? What are the biggest adopters of IIP solutions in your market, specifically the States and Europe?
Yeah, absolutely. I think where we've really seen acceleration here, I think fintech has been a big one, crypto. Even I think a lot of maybe more mid-tier and smaller banks, I think, are seeing the real benefit here because they don't have the 200, 300 person team that can implement 40 different solutions.
So we're not talking about big. We're not talking about big capital investment to roll these out. We're talking about quite agile, lean, and that can be rolled out quite quickly and give them an unfair advantage over the bigger guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and I think Contactable, this is true for you guys, right? I mean, you can start with a certain part of the solution and expand, right? I think that's really the benefit, right? IPs and a lot of the way they're being deployed is not a take it all or leave it all. It's very modular, which I think really meets that buyer demand, right? And the need for flexibility, because the way, great example, right? We talked about decentralized identity. Well, there's a big trend towards passwordless right now, but I still get 1 million SMS OTPs, right? You need to be able to do both. And if, you put all your eggs in one basket, you're cutting off a lot of customers who, frankly, just learned and adopted things like SMS OTP. So you have to have kind of both a foot in today's world and a foot in tomorrow. And I think IIPs give you that flexibility, which is what you really need.
We've got 8 minutes left. Let's see if we can make Delian sigh in her chair. Let's do one more poll and see if it gets the rating of stupid question. So the poll's coming out. How many vendors are you currently using for your digital onboarding? Up to 10, 10 to 20, and oh my word, my life is at an end. More than 20. Let's see where we're coming out there. While we're doing that, Brandon, as we come to the end of the year, from a drive from identity and that, do you see a spike in people trying to take advantage of I'm trying to put it nicely. Do you see a spike in fraudulent attempts? And Is this like par for the course for you, or is there an uptick because of the technological advantage that they have?
Definitely a massive uptick. Not really technological advantage. It's two elements that we're seeing the huge uptick in fraud. Obviously, the first element, which everyone will see, is as consumers get more and more indebted and more financially frustrated, silly things start to happen. And the fraudsters and syndicates definitely work on that, where desperation for sales comes in. Shortcuts can be done by human beings. The syndicates will target those areas massively. The second thing, and this is we see this every year, we call December the silly season, because we always see an uptick massively in this area. Again, people going on leave, skeleton staff at retail, easier target. The syndicates work massively in that area. So definitely increasing massively. And the security features around trying to prevent that is quite a big thing.
Awesome. So, gents, the polls have come out. 84% up to 10 to 20 is 11%, and then shame poor 7% of the folks have got more than 20. Sean, in your experience, are people dealing with them in the same areas? Is the same IT or someone, or is these scattered? Where does it talk to this poll?
Yeah, it's certainly scattered, to answer your question. And I think if one looks at how you phrase the question on just digital onboarding, right? So that would mean the simplicity of provide some ability to add an ID, do a biometric, maybe scan their ID document, something simple like that. And you probably right. It's probably up to 10 different vendors, because you're talking different biometrics, different golden source integrations, different technologies to verify the ID document, just basic stuff like that. If you expand that across the customer lifecycle, all right, which is now, let's talk the basics of now I need to take them to a KYC, a fraud, a re-verification, drive them into a product and solution, get the bank to approve it, the whole customer journey, which IIPs take care of. That number, in our experience, when we start going into organizations and unpacking what they're currently doing and how many vendors they are using, is sometimes 80, 90 different vendors, because they might have multiple data integrations just to verify an address, multiple bureaus, multiple this. It's becoming inordinately complex for organizations to manage this. So this number, in our experience, is significantly bigger. And, you asked earlier around some of the things that stop organizations from adopting it. It's also this fears like, am I going to make a mistake if I go with this biometric vendor or this solution, or what happens then? And certainly that risk of vendor lock-in is a reality, not just the complexity of integrating the stuff in a coordinated fashion, because to bring things in and integrate them, that's the easy stuff. But how does that speak to a workflow? How does it speak to an outcome? How does it speak to, in Brandon's world, I actually just want to sell the vehicle? There's massive complexity, and it's got to be glued together in a manner that makes sense. All right. So yeah, this vendor lock-in thing, it's changing quickly. Am I on the right vendor now? No. Well, if it changes tomorrow, don't worry. The IIP just takes care of that for you. So you don't have to worry about making a mistake. Okay. But if you stick with single vendor integrations, you're going to sit with that problem, because it's not designed to glue it all together.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Gents, I'm going to ask you each a last question to sum up the day. Brandon, your question, and I'm going to run around so you got time to think about it. Brandon, your question is, what are the 3 lessons that you've learned by rolling this out across, and like, how could you do it better next time? Will, for your question is, where can we read more? Where would you say we could learn more about what's happening in this space for our folks here? And then for you, Sean, from a C-level perspective, what do you look for in a partner when you're going out in an IIP? What are the 3 things that we should be looking for before appointing somebody? Okay, so Brandon, you as the last, join you the first to go with your summary. What are your lessons for us?
I suppose the first lesson that we've learned through this journey is just how dynamic and how quick changing the world around us is. And, you know, when we were working on this idea of a digital or omni-channel onboarding experience, our number one fear, and the phrase hadn't been coined, I don't think, integrated identity platform, but our number one fear was to be locked into a provider. And we were looking for something agnostic, where if something doesn't work, you unplug, you plug something else into it. And it took a long time also to convince business into that. And that's a big learning in that business needed to understand that this isn't just an immediate ROI matter. You know, ROI is one thing, but you're looking backwards for your return on your investment. This is the future. This is what will you lose by not doing it. And I suppose the one thing we could have probably done different, but we didn't know it at the time, was to indicate just how much saving you get from a flawless experience. You know, because this is an upfront cost in terms of pure Excel spreadsheet accounting. You're going from a human being using their photocopier, so there's zero cost, to a system where you're paying for access, you're paying for things. But you then take a 2-hour user experience down to a few seconds with no documents, no anything. Well, that's a future cost that's very different. So yeah, so that's what we've learned, and the adoption from humans. We should have gotten human beings to test a lot more in our own staff on themselves to see how the tech works, and then adoption, I think, would have been quicker.
Thank you, Brandon. Will, you've got about 45 seconds.
I'll be quick. Well, your question was where can you learn more? I'm going to say go to Liminal would be my first. But, you know, I do think it's really important if you're, you know, evaluating this, you know, if you're a buyer, if you're a vendor, et cetera, to be really focused in on, you know, what are the use cases I'm trying to solve, right, for here, and what do I need to do in my market? I think a lot of times where folks get in trouble is, you know, they read a position paper about, you know, something like decentralized identity, which sounds great, but isn't, you know, necessarily practical today in terms of implementation. And to Sean's point, put all their eggs in that basket. Or, you know, they read, you might do some research and look at, you know, you might be in fintech and look at what the big tier 1 banks are doing. That's not necessarily going to be the right fit for you either, right? So I think you need to understand who you are, what the demands of your customers are, and what you need to do, and what are the use cases, and who solves those use cases, right? Because they're different in each industry, and you know, whether it's a compliance use case or a fraud use case or a trust and safety use case, you know, the requirements for what you're looking for in a product are going to be different. So
understand your identity. Oh, I like that. Okay, go. And Sean, last say, thank you very much, Sean, CEO of Contactable. What do you look for in a partner from a company perspective?
Well, what we always enjoy is, and this also speaks to what I think C-level should consider, you know, when they're going on this journey. And I really think it's, you know, organizations that really go and embrace and understand, you know, what is this customer ecosystem and journey that they're trying to solve for? Because, you know, once that resonates and the penny drops on that, everything else really flows. So I think that's the first important thing. And it's always nice to work with organizations that take that very, very seriously and are committed to the adoption and driving this through. And Brandon touched on some of those things. It's a journey, right? So, but it's got to be driven, you know, from that level. You know, C-levels that understand that this is a complex thing and really should look at solutions that can actually take them through this journey, not only for today, but into the future, so that you know, eliminate that fear and that you can actually evolve as this industry is evolving very, very quickly. And then the last thing is possibly be careful of all the new shiny toys, because you can get distracted very, very quickly and pulled into a particular direction with no context. So consult, ask, you know, make sure one is understanding how these toys play and that you can implement them successfully in an environment that actually drives a proper outcome. Happy customer, more sales, lower friction, lower fraud, and ultimately that enables us to provide these digital inclusive solutions into the market.
Thank you so much, Sean, Will, Brandon, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. My name's Daniel Robus. I've loved hosting this webinar. It's been so good to be back. Gary, come on. Hey, let's bring it home.